When Sarah signed the lease for the apartment, she didn't expect much. Just a place to study, sleep, and survive the grind of college life. But the moment she stepped into her new room, she felt it. An eerie, unexplainable presence in the apartment. It was the kind of feeling that lingers in dark corners, something you can't quite place, but know is there, watching. Her roommate Emily was waiting when she arrived, quiet, polite, and pleasant in the way a stranger with nothing to prove can be. "I'm glad you're here," Emily said, smiling a little too widely. "I've been here for a while. You'll like it. It's quiet." Sarah didn't think much of it. After all, college wasn't about making deep connections. But that first week, little things began to nag at her. The first oddity was Emily's room. It was always locked. Always. Sarah couldn't even remember ever seeing it open, except for a brief moment when she caught Emily slipping in with a suitcase. That was the first time she noticed the faint smell of something metallic, like blood, but she told herself it was probably the plumbing or some old food somewhere in the building. The second thing was Emily's odd behavior. She was always polite, but distant. There were no personal conversations, no sharing of stories or thoughts. Emily would often vanish for days at a time, leaving Sarah to fend for herself. No note, no explanation. She simply wasn't there. When she did come back, she was always different. Her eyes too wide, too intense, and the things she said sometimes didn't quite add up. "Don't go in the closet," Emily would warn, as if it were the most casual thing in the world. Not for any reason. Sarah, perplexed, but too polite to question it, brushed it off. But as the weeks passed, the strange occurrences grew harder to ignore. The smell of bleach would linger in the apartment after Emily returned, but when Sarah asked if anything had happened, Emily would only smile that unnerving smile. Then came the night Sarah decided to confront her. Emily had been gone for 3 days, and Sarah, feeling both frustrated and unnerved, finally decided to look. It wasn't like her to snoop, but something inside her told her it was necessary. She needed to know the truth. As she crept to Emily's locked room, her heart beat in her throat. The door was cold to the touch, the faint metallic smell still lingering in the air. Taking a breath, Sarah managed to turn the knob, only to find the door locked, just as it always was. But this time, something felt different. The air seemed thicker, and she could hear the faintest sound, almost like a breathing, slow, rhythmic, controlled. Her pulse quickened. With trembling fingers, she slid her phone from her pocket, using the flashlight to peer around the room. As her light danced over the shadows, she noticed something in the corner, a small, old photo album. It was odd, an album of what looked like faded images, all of Emily, but different versions of her, younger, older, in various places. They didn't seem to match the Emily Sarah knew, but the most unsettling part was the name at the bottom of one of the photos, Amanda Howard. Before Sarah could think any further, the front door creaked open. "Sarah?" Emily's voice was soft, but her eyes were dark and cold. "What are you doing here?" Sarah's stomach dropped. I was just looking for something. I don't know." She froze, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Emily's gaze sharpened, locking onto her, and for the first time, Sarah saw something dangerous flicker in her roommate's eyes. "I told you not to go in there," Emily said, her voice suddenly much colder, more menacing. Sarah stood frozen. "Who are you?" There was a long, tense silence. Emily didn't answer at first. Then she sighed, a heavy, resigned sound. You really don't know, do you? Know what? Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Emily stepped into the room, shutting the door behind her with a soft click. I'm not who I said I am. None of this is real. My name isn't Emily. It's Amanda Howard. I'm being hunted. Her voice cracked, the calmness slipping, revealing something raw, something terrified. And now, you're caught up in it. Sarah's confusion deepened. Hunted? By who? Amanda took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. By someone dangerous. Someone who's been looking for me for years. Someone I can't escape. Sarah's mind spun, the room suddenly spinning with questions she couldn't process fast enough. What does that mean? What are you talking about? Amanda looked at her, a tear slipping down her cheek. They don't care about who I am anymore. All they care about is that I'm here, in this town. And if they find out that I'm not dead... Dead? Sarah interrupted, her voice shaking. What do you mean, you're dead? Amanda turned to face her, her eyes hollow, filled with both sorrow and a strange kind of relief. I faked my death. I had to. I had to disappear. You don't know what they'll do if they catch me, Sarah. You don't understand what they'll do to you, to anyone who gets in the way. The reality of what she was hearing hit Sarah like a cold, suffocating wave. She stepped back. You lied to me. You've been lying to me this whole time. Amanda's face softened, guilt washing over her. I never wanted to get you involved in this. I never wanted you to know. But it's too late now. You've seen too much. You've heard too much. And now they'll come for both of us. Sarah's eyes darted around the room, panic seizing her. I need to leave. I need to get out of here. Amanda stepped forward, grabbing Sarah's wrist. You can't leave. You think they won't find you too. You think this ends if you walk out the door. Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat. It was true. She couldn't escape. She was already trapped, already part of the game. Just as she was about to pull away, a sound echoed from the hallway. A heavy knock, followed by the unmistakable voice of a man calling her name. Amanda, come out. We know you're here. Sarah's heart stopped. It was too late. Amanda's grip tightened. You should have stayed away. Now we both have to run. And in that moment, Sarah realized she wasn't just caught in Amanda's game. She was now a part of it, a pawn in a deadly game of cat and mouse with no way out. The door slammed open. The hunt had begun. It was supposed to be the perfect weekend, just the two of them, alone in a cabin nestled in the heart of the woods. But from the moment Rachel stepped over the threshold, something didn't feel right. The air was thick, almost damp, and the silence around them was suffocating, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. She smiled, trying to shake off the unease. It's just your imagination, she whispered, glancing at Ben, who had already set down the bags and was inspecting the kitchen. Ben was a skeptic, always had been. He laughed it off when Rachel mentioned the silence. You're being dramatic, he teased. It's just a cabin. It's old. There's bound to be some creaking. They spent the first evening settling in, lighting the fireplace, unpacking their bags, and trying to shake the nagging feeling that someone was watching them. But Rachel couldn't ignore the prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the way the shadows seemed to move when no one was looking. The next morning, they went for a hike. The woods were beautiful, filled with towering trees and the distant sound of birds chirping. For a while, Rachel let herself forget the strange feeling that had been growing in the pit of her stomach. But when they returned to the cabin, things started to get off. Rachel was the first to notice. The door to the small pantry was slightly ajar. She swore she had closed it before they left. And then there was the chair. One of the kitchen chairs had been moved out of place. The faintest scrape marks on the floor, as if someone had dragged it across the room. "Ben," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Did you move the chair?" He didn't even glance up from the stove, where he was trying to prepare a simple lunch. "No, I didn't touch anything. Probably just the wind or something." The wind. Rachel frowned, her gaze flickering to the windows. The curtains were still. No wind. It wasn't until that night that things truly started to unravel. As they settled into bed, the strange sounds began. At first, it was a faint creaking from above. Rachel, who had been lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, assumed it was the house settling. But then she heard it again, a soft, almost imperceptible rustling, like someone was moving in the attic. She froze. Ben had already fallen asleep, his steady breathing beside her. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone in the cabin. She lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds above her, each creak and scrape making her skin prickle. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She climbed out of bed, her bare feet cold against the wooden floor, and tiptoed to the attic door. The latch was old, rusty. It gave a soft groan when she pulled it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading up into the darkness. Her breath hitched in her chest. What was up there? She knew she should wake Ben, but something stopped her. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fear. Either way, she had to know. She crept up the stairs, each step creaking under her weight. The attic was dark, the only light coming from a small window at the far end. Dust hung in the air, and the smell of mildew made her gag. But that wasn't what caught her attention. It was the unmistakable shape of something, or someone, huddled in the corner, hidden by boxes and old furniture. Rachel froze, her blood running cold. A figure, sitting, watching. Her mind raced. Had Ben been up here? Had he brought something up from the car? Number. This was different. The figure was too still, too quiet, and the sense of being watched. It was overwhelming now, suffocating. Before she could take another step forward, the figure shifted, just slightly, as if it was aware of her presence. "Ben?" she whispered, her voice trembling. But the figure didn't respond. Suddenly, a soft, guttural whisper came from the darkness above. "I've been waiting for you." Rachel's heart pounded in her chest, her legs turning to jelly. She backed away, but as she did, her foot caught on something, sending a loud crash of metal echoing through the space. The figure lunged. With a sharp gasp, Rachel stumbled backward and turned, running for the stairs. She nearly fell as she bolted down, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She flung the attic door shut and ran straight for Ben, shaking him awake. "Ben, wake up!" Her voice was frantic, desperate. Ben groggily opened his eyes, confused. "Rachel!" "What's wrong?" "Someone's in the attic," she cried, nearly hysterical. "We need to get out of here now." Ben frowned, still half asleep. "You're not making sense. There's no one here." But Rachel could hear the sound again. Faint, almost inaudible, but unmistakable. The rustling from above, like someone moving, pacing, waiting. "I've been waiting for you." The words echoed in her mind, sending a chill down her spine. "No, Ben, listen to me," she screamed, grabbing him by the shoulders. "There's someone in the attic. Someone's been here the whole time." Ben's eyes narrowed. Okay, I'll go check it out, he said, trying to soothe her, but his expression was hardening. He wasn't sure whether to believe her or think she was just losing it. But when he reached the attic door, his face went pale. It was wide open. His hand shook as he pulled himself up the stairs, and Rachel followed behind, her breath caught in her throat. They reached the top, but the attic was empty. The dust was undisturbed. There was no figure, no one sitting in the corner. But Rachel's blood ran cold as she noticed something else. A stack of old journals, several of them, sat in the corner next to a decaying box. She recognized one of them instantly. It was the journal Ben had bought at a flea market years ago, the one that had supposedly belonged to a man who had lived in the cabin long before it was abandoned. He told her the story once, laughing at how it was just another urban legend. Now, though, the smile faded from Ben's face as he picked up the journal, flipping it open. July 3rd, 1997. I've watched them. They never see me. They never know I'm here. This cabin is mine. I am their ghost. The writing continued, each page more unsettling than the last, filled with rambling notes about watching, waiting, and never leaving. Ben's fingers froze on the last page. A small photo was taped to the back. It was of the cabin, taken from the attic, and standing in the window was a woman. Rachel's heart stopped. It was her. But that was impossible. She hadn't even been born when the photo was taken. The whispers grew louder. "I've been waiting." The door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. Rachel's scream echoed through the cabin. The first sign that something was wrong came the moment Nathan entered the hotel. It wasn't the musty smell of mildew or the creaking floors. No, it was the manager's smile, the kind of smile that seemed a little too wide, a little too eager, as if he'd been waiting for Nathan's arrival far longer than anyone should have. "Welcome to the Hollow Inn," the manager said, his voice smooth and soft, like it belonged to someone who had never raised it in anger. "You're the only guest tonight, just so you know, but you're in good hands. We'll take care of you." Nathan tried to smile back, the exhaustion from his long drive weighing heavily on his shoulders. He had been on the road for hours, and after the isolation of winding country roads, the old hotel was a welcome sight. He didn't care that the place was run down. He just needed somewhere to sleep. The manager handed him a key with an odd, ornate tag. "Room 13, a favorite of ours," he added, with a glimmer of something in his eyes that Nathan couldn't quite decipher. "You'll find it comfortable." Nathan barely registered the strange comment as he made his way to the stairs. The lobby was silent, the walls lined with dusty old portraits that stared down at him, their eyes seeming a little too lifelike. As he climbed the stairs, he glanced back to see the manager watching him from behind the front desk, still smiling. Once inside his room, Nathan sighed in relief. The bed was unmade, the sheets a little stained, but it was fine, better than sleeping in the car. He threw his bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his tired eyes. The exhaustion was creeping up on him, but something nagged at the back of his mind. Something wasn't quite right. The hotel was quiet, too quiet. He hadn't seen a single other guest. The hallway outside his door was empty, and the silence seemed to press against him. Even the air felt too still, like the place hadn't been touched in years. Curiosity tugged at him. He wanted to explore, to get a feel for the place, but something held him back. Instead, he decided to unpack his bag. But before he could do much else, the lights flickered once and then went out, plunging him into darkness. "Great," he muttered, fumbling for his phone. The light from the screen was dim, but enough to guide him down the hallway. He didn't want to deal with trying to fix the power, but he needed to get out of his room. The oppressive silence had started to gnaw at him, like it was closing in. Nathan wandered the halls, his footsteps echoing against the old wood. The hotel felt like a maze, the floors groaning underfoot, as if it had been built on shifting ground. At every turn, the place seemed to change. Narrower hallways, odd doorways that led to nothing. The air was thick, saturated with the smell of something damp and decaying. And there was something else, a sense of being watched, just out of sight. He passed several rooms, their doors slightly ajar. One room, in particular, caught his eye. The door was slightly open, but there was a faint glow coming from inside, even though the power was out. His curiosity got the best of him, and he pushed the door open. Inside was a small, dark room with no furniture. The walls were covered in strange symbols, jagged, intricate carvings that looked almost like they had been etched in haste. They weren't decorative. They were purposeful, ancient-looking, as if they were a warning. Nathan's breath caught in his throat as he noticed something else. On the floor, scattered in a haphazard pile, were personal items, clothes, shoes, a suitcase, items that looked like they had been left behind. But why? He stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. The air in the room felt oppressive, charged with something cold and unsettling. There was no way these things belonged to anyone who had checked in recently. They had the look of things left long ago, things that were never going to be used again. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He wasn't alone. A whisper, faint but distinct, echoed through the dark room. "Leave now." Nathan spun around, but there was no one there. His breath came in quick, shallow bursts. The symbols on the wall seemed to shift, moving in his peripheral vision. A sharp noise broke the silence, a thud from the floor above him. He had to get out of here. As he turned to leave, his phone suddenly flickered, the screen glowing bright before dying. The darkness seemed to close in even tighter. The whispering grew louder, now unmistakable. "Leave now, or you'll stay." Heart pounding, Nathan stumbled back into the hallway, desperate to find an exit. But as he moved down the corridor, everything changed. The hall stretched unnaturally. Doors he had passed earlier were now gone, and he was lost in a labyrinth that had no end. Every turn led him back to the same place, room 13. The door to room 13 stood open now, and Nathan felt drawn to it, as if the hotel itself were calling him in. He couldn't resist. His feet carried him forward. Inside the room, the bed was no longer messy, but perfectly made. The air had shifted, feeling heavier now. The manager's face appeared before him, his smile broader than ever. "You shouldn't have stayed," the manager said, his voice cold now, devoid of warmth. "You came looking for solitude, but it always finds you here. It traps you." Suddenly, the walls of the room seemed to close in, and Nathan was frozen. The symbols from the other room, the ones he had seen carved into the walls, appeared again, this time on the bed, on the floor, everywhere. They pulsed, alive with an unnatural energy. Nathan's pulse raced. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The hotel had him now. It had claimed him. The manager stepped closer, his face now twisted in something dark, almost inhuman. "You were never meant to leave," he whispered. And with that, the world around Nathan went black. When the morning sun broke through the clouds the next day, the hotel was silent once again. The hollow inn stood as it always had, waiting for the next traveler to find it, to step inside and never leave.